one of the greatest games of all time. Released 18 years ago and still remains within the top 100 games. Winner of multiple awards and remembered by many as one of the best Star Wars games, nestled within a mountain of others. Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic is a legendary release not only within the Star Wars universe, but in all of gaming, helping to legitimize the Western RPG market and bring it to the masses, while revolutionizing story and character-based RPGs. Not many games can claim to be as influential as Bioware's magnum opus. But is this level of flating still accurate? Is KOTOR as good as we remember? Can it still hold up after 18 hard years? And is the story still the masterpiece many claim it to be? These are the questions that this video aims to answer, so strap yourself into the Ebon Hawk's pilot seat because we're hitting hyperspace. Bioware. Founded in 1995, are now famous for the style it headlined with KOTOR, with titles such as Mass Effect and Dragon Age pulling direct influence from the Star Wars game. Before KOTOR, however, they had already found fame and success within the PC and D&D communities, with titles such as the Baldur's Gate games and Neverwinter Nights. The developers had perfectly married their love for the D&D tabletop game style and world with the technologies available at the time. Following their success on the PC, Bioware wanted to branch out. Having sold their license to producing D&D games, in the early 2000s they partnered with LucasArts to bring an RPG to the Star Wars universe. At the same time, Microsoft were developing their first foray into the console gaming market with the original Xbox. Wanted to secure as many high-quality launch titles as they could, Microsoft would help finance KOTOR for exclusive rights to release the game on the Xbox and PC. All of Bioware's ducks were pot in a row. With the funding and IP rights they needed, Bioware were in the ideal position to introduce thousands of Star Wars fans and console gamers alike to the possibilities of a character-based, story-driven RPG. I mentioned the Xbox because a lot of people underestimate how much of a difference KOTOR made to the launch of that console. Sure, Halo was by far and away the standout launch title, but having a Star Wars game that advertised itself with cutting-edge graphics, fully voiced dialogue, and a sprawling universe worth of worlds to explore was by far and away enough of an enticement to sell consoles to those fans. Remember that Star Wars was in the midst of its early 2000s renaissance, with Attack of the Clones hitting cinemas only 1 year earlier. This was a system seller for Microsoft and introduced console gamers to what a real Western RPG could offer them. 250,000 copies were sold in just 4 days, and by the time of the Xbox 360's release, KOTOR had secured itself as one of the best-selling games of the entire console's lifespan. So, the game's 18 years old and debuted on a console that is now 3 generations behind. Let's be honest here, the gameplay is outdated. Statistically, there were people watching this very video who weren't even born when this game was released. Some aged mechanics are to be expected. Overall, gameplay is certainly clunky when compared to the fluidity of modern video games. There are many moments where you are aware that you are playing a game from a different time, whether it be because of the control system, the lore-breaking tutorial section where a desperate soldier in a hurry breaks down how to use a mouse, or getting stuck on corners and your party members getting lost somewhere in the level, leaving you unable to progress to the next room. A lot of this can be overlooked if you acknowledge that you're playing a game from 2003. If you survived Morrowind, Simpsons Hit and Run, and Tony Hawk's Underground, then you should be able to wrap your head around what it's like to play an older title. Combat is a rarely seen mix of real-time fighting and turn-based traditional RPG mechanics. While it isn't the relatively fast-paced action of the Elder Scrolls, it also isn't the slow-paced strategy of the Pokemon series. Instead, it uniquely sits in the middle. Fighting involves lining up a variety of actions for the player to enact, much akin to a turn-based game, and you may pause the game as much as you like to do so, but you're also free to play the entire game without a single pause, using movement, grenades, and force powers to your advantage. In the first hours of the game, it's easy to assume it simply boils down to running up to an opponent and click an attack until they fall, but as you begin to fail on multiple occasions, you'll soon learn otherwise. A lot of planning can be involved, making the combat a surprisingly in-depth strategic experience that plays differently depending on which companions you bring with you and how you build your character. Setting traps, positioning your various squad mates in the ideal position, running away from melee characters to heal, and switching to your party members to ensure they're using the ideal type of attacks and skills to guarantee success in battle. There's a lot of nuance and pre-planning in regards to managing energy shields, stimulant use and force abilities. At first this can seem complicated, but after a few hours, you soon master the strategic mindset you need to best optimize the combat system. Some awkwardness is to be expected in areas. Often companions will ignore your commands, and animations soon become repetitive, but as the combat is so unique from any modern game, it still remains a compelling and tactical system. Unlike some RPGs where you eventually hit a point where you can dominate most enemies, KOTOR retains a solid challenge throughout, enticing the player to utilize all the possible side quests to help them level up stronger and utilize their party members to overcome obstacles. And even then, some of the boss battles, especially at the end of the game, can be a serious threat. Unless you play on an easier difficulty, you will rarely enter a fight where you are completely confident in your abilities. Combat is only a fraction of the gameplay, however. You can play through a large chunk of the game and avoid huge swaths of combat with the correct speech options, tech skills, or tactics. With enough supplies and the right skills, you can make the combat a cakewalk using the correct strategies and pre-planning to wipe out entire squads of enemies. Choice is key to KOTOR's gameplay. Do you build a tanky warrior and fight every problem head on but sacrifice your ability to talk your way out of problems? Or do you invest into your computer skills, cause huge damage and even bypass whole quests, but now you've left yourself vulnerable to combat situations? It's these levels of options and freedom that make KOTOR one of the best story-based RPGs to replay. You aren't only playing for a different story outcome, but to experience the game in an entirely different playstyle. You choose that playstyle during your character creation, the very first thing you do within the game. Creating your own character is a staple of most Western RPGs, and KOTOR is no different. Pick from 3 classes, the Scout, the Soldier, and the Scoundrel, with each class allowing the player to max out various skills. With the Soldier being more combat based, the Scoundrel being stealth based, and the Scout sitting somewhere in the middle. There are a variety of preset faces to pick from, all of which appear on various NPCs in the game. However, the game does seem to swap out any of the faces that the player has picked, so don't worry about running into any doppelgangers on your journey across the galaxy. Once your appearance has been chosen, we enter the meat and potatoes of KOTOR's replayability. Anyone who has ever played a D&D based game will be familiar here. Your attributes cover your overall gameplay abilities, such as strength modifying your melee damage and charisma affecting how persuasive the player is. Next we have the skills. These all have their place within the world and affect a variety of gameplay options. Computer use dictates how adept the player is at hacking the various terminals throughout the galaxy. A high skill means you have greater options and can hack more efficiently than a character with a low skill, and having a 0 will remove the ability entirely. Demolitions affects a player's ability to plant all kinds of landmines. A high skilled demolitions character can even loot the mines scattered on the planet's surfaces to use later, or to sell for a high profit. Stealth is kind of useless. Look, this game is 18 years old and sadly not everything aged well. This isn't Skyrim's stealth system. It basically boils down to whether or not the player has a successful chance of some bonus damage on the first attack against an NPC. It's one of those skills you may find yourself regretting speccing into at the end of a playthrough. Awareness should, in theory, help the player in identifying enemies from further away, but it unfortunately only affects the ability to discover mines. Seeing as just having a skill level of 5 is enough for most mines, this skill can be a little bit useless. Persuade is a game changer. If you've ever played Fallout New Vegas, then you know that speech systems that allow you to greatly change your playthrough with a speech check can be hugely gratifying. And KOTOR is no exception. Having a high persuasion skill can entirely bypass some sections of the game, while greatly altering others. This is one skill most would consider essential. Repair, much like computer use, allows the player to use in-game items to repair select robots dotted around the game world. These can be a great help in some of the harder battles. Security is the lockpicking skill, reflecting the player's chance to open locked doors and containers, some of which contain some very expensive and useful items. And finally, treat injury is pretty self-explanatory in that it covers how much health can be recovered when using any healing item or healing force ability. After the skills, there are the feats. These are the perks of this game. Once unlocked, they will allow a new ability to be used in-game, such as a new attack or higher stats and chances when using a specific skill. There are lots of choices to make here, but luckily you don't play KOTOR as a one-man army, and can instead maximize your party's build across 2 more characters. In KOTOR, unlike in the more recent Bioware titles like Mass Effect, the main character can't do everything. You can cover most bases, but you'll always find yourself relying on someone else. The key element comes from picking who best accompanies your playstyle and the mission at hand. At the start of the game, you will find yourself relying on your teammates a lot, mainly to open containers or for setting and recovering mines. But by the time you have a full squad of Jedi, it becomes very enticing to roll around with a team of overpowered Force users dominating the battlefield, with your vast array of mine-altering skills. Yet even with this option, there are still compelling arguments to use the other companions, especially when you consider that having a ranged character that specialises in high explosive damage can be the perfect fallback if your up close and personal melee characters fall in the fray. Throughout KOTOR, you will discover a possible 9 different side characters who can travel with you on your ship and be taken down to each planet to help you during your playthrough. This is a nigh-on one-to-one parallel with the iconic movies. The entire concept of going on an epic journey through the galaxy on your ex-smuggling ship, finding new memorable members for your squad, and becoming an absolute unit of story progression is the entire premise of the original trilogy. By far one of the biggest reasons for this game's success and place in gaming history is its writing for each companion, how they all interact with each other and with the player, and their unique dialogues and personalities. It is these personalities that go a long way in making KOTOR as enduring within gaming royalty as it is. Every companion has a backstory for you to discover, their own motives, reasons for following you, and their own trials and tribulations they must go through alongside your journey. They all have a story of their own which aids in making the world feel more alive. It doesn't feel like a world created just for the player to explore, but instead a galaxy full of real breathing people that have their own lives. A hallmark stamp for quality characters is when each one remains notable after a playthrough, when each one is important to the game's story and unforgettable when you eventually pot it down. This is especially true when each character can be easily described in detail by everyone who has played the game. Each one of your companions follows a standard stereotype, at first at least, but as you learn more about them, you soon realise they have more nuances than that they have their own doubts about that stereotype people expect them to fill. It is this in-depth writing that makes each one feel real. Bastila is the noble, perfect and powerful Jedi with abilities far above her masters. She follows the code to the letter and sees herself as the example of the ideal Jedi, yet she struggles with the knowledge that her masters do not want to promote her. She struggles with her affections to the main character, and she thinks so highly of herself that it becomes obnoxious and egotistical instead of the empowering and idealistic she wishes to be. Carth as the roguelike Han Solo character, until you learn that he has major trust issues following a great loss and betrayal from his past. He follows orders without question, and yet is always internally battling his own thoughts. Mission as the naive teenage rebel who is always fighting her elders, yet eventually learns of the deception within her past and grows and matures over the course of the game. Zalbo as the quiet conservative type who stays to himself and only speaks up when he's needed, but has a dark secret from his past that has forced him to become this, until the player can help him in solving his past dilemma. Canderous as the hardcore takes no bull mercenary, who would kill on sight with no remorse, who you find to be an aging long-time war veteran pining for his past, hoping he can rekindle the fire he once had. Jolie Bindo as the old hermit stuck in a forest, who at first you think is crazy or annoying, but eventually wins you over with his stories, humour and teachings about the failings of both the Sith and the Jedi. HK-47 as the comic relief droid, programmed to enact pain and punishment with exact precision and with an aversion to meatbags. Juhani as the fallen Jedi, who finds her way back to the light, but has a troubled past and broken childhood, making her redemption harder and harder to maintain as she fights the anger deep within. And T3M4 as the protocol droid, who becomes handy in certain situations. Sorry T3, you've got a great personality in KOTOR 2, but in the first one you're a bit boring, especially compared to your on-screen counterpart. As you progress through the game, your teammates will interact with each other every so often, usually resulting in insightful and amusing outcomes.
Statement. I believe there can be little doubt that we have found the star map you were seeking. Comment. Now that we have found the star map, I see little reason for us to remain in this tomb, Master.
The companions don't just feel like NPCs that only listen to you, they instead have their own thoughts and opinions. They react to what you do in the game with vastly different attitudes based on what kind of person they are. They will often interject with their own speculation and blessings or criticism based on what you do. But as with most aspects of KOTOR, whether you wish to delve into these characters or even acknowledge anything they say is entirely up to the player. KOTOR is as in-depth and as long as an experience as you want it to be. You may want to try and discover everything, have every conversation possible, learn every little bit of lore you can, and garner as much experience points as the game allows. Or you may just want to beeline the story and focus more on the action and the essential decisions. That's the great thing about most RPGs. Not everything is essential. Many NPCs only exist to help build the world and grow the player's knowledge of this unique Star Wars time period. It's these additions that help the game to be so alluring and meaningful for those who play it. As a huge fan of Morrowind, I'll be the first to say that KOTOR wouldn't be nearly as good of a game, nor as memorable, if it wasn't for it being fully voice acted. This was a brilliant move by Bioware, ensuring the cinematic quality one expects from the Star Wars universe, while guaranteeing all players remain invested within the story and the vast variety of NPCs they'll be talking to. It's hilarious how some of the actors throw themselves into their roles 120% as well.
No hard feelings, my good man, but I can't really talk with you right now. It's difficult enough to draw the interest of the ladies in this establishment as it is. Surely you understand what I'm talking about. I guess you've experienced many lonely evenings, something I'm hoping to avoid tonight.
Sure, it may be corny from the standards of today's super hardcore no fun allowed storytelling, but it fits perfectly into the world of Star Wars. Comedy has always been present within the movies, so it makes sense that it should be here too, even if it's because of the amusing acting from some of the NPCs. Seeing that there must be thousands, if not millions, of lines of dialogue in this game, it's astounding how the majority of the voice acting fits so well. No one sounds like they're phoning in their performance, from the random NPCs to the shopkeepers, and of course all the main companions and important characters. In some areas, you will find reused character models and a few of the same voice actors being used, but this is to be expected given the size of the project. Bethesda have been pulling that same stint since Oblivion as well. The only issue I have with the dialogue is with the alien races. While it makes perfect sense that some of the characters won't be speaking Galactic Basic, it can be annoying to rehear the same 20-second piece of alien dialogue played over and over. It does make sense for Bioware to do this to help curb some of the voice acting costs, however. Regardless of this issue, the inclusion of alien dialogue still goes a long way in ensuring the game feels like Star Wars. The combination of excellent writing and compelling voice acting blend perfectly to keep the player invested in the story and fully immersed into this Star Wars world. Immersion. That's the keystone for any RPG, really. Bioware had a hard task when accepting to make a Star Wars game. Not only do they have to appeal to millions of already existing fans, but said fanbase is infamous for its rabid reactions to any changes they deem unacceptable. When accepting the contract, LucasArts gave Bioware two options. Either they make a game set during the Clone Wars to coincide with the current films being released at the time, or they choose a time period set thousands of years ago. As the name Knights of the Old Republic implies, they went for the second one. This created an exciting situation for Bioware. They had hundreds of books full of lore to utilise, and were placed in a position to create a metric ton of their own. They could have essentially free reign over what technologies are available, how certain worlds look, what the space vehicles look like, what clothes the NPCs wear. They were free to reinvent Star Wars in any way they so pleased, as long as it still felt like Star Wars. KOTOR is unique as a Star Wars game not only because it is an RPG, but because the time period is something completely unseen on screen before. This is the civilized era Obi-Wan mentioned. Blaster rifles still exist, sure, but all armies agree that melee weapons are still superior for close range battle, especially with the invention and usage of energy shields that all but make blaster fire useless against those equipped with them. Medieval-esque swords made of exotic metals clash against each other, with both soldiers clad in metal armor. It's no wonder Bioware went on to make Dragon Age. Their medieval influence is immediately apparent. The buildings on each planet have slightly different aesthetics from those of the movies too, displaying a different era of architecture. There are a total of 9 different locales the player can visit, all with unique architecture, weather and climate, races, towns and cities. From the 3-tiered rundown mega metropolis of Taris, to the barren fields and Jedi enclave of Dantooine. Iconic planets from the movies make an appearance too, namely Tatooine's desert hellscape and Kashyyyk's luscious forests. Exploring each planet is rewarded with loot and experience from quests, combat and minigames. Exploration in KOTOR finds itself in an awkward position. On the first playthrough, it is an exciting, alluring, beautiful, compelling and exotic experience, but don't go in expecting the Elder Scrolls here. After that initial playthrough, as long as you are somewhat thorough, you will have seen 95% of everything there is to offer when it comes to the game world. This may sound detrimental for future playthroughs, but KOTOR's strength isn't only in its world design. Each planet contains its own characters, quests, and story, entirely confined to that one location. These self-contained stories can last for multiple hours themselves. They offer a comprehensive look into the politics of each world, how the native species are suffering under the control of an empire, or the exploitation of a planet's resources by an intergalactic corporation. Each overarching planet quest also contains a myriad of other side quests as well, with each one offering different choices that can entirely change how they play out. Everything feels layered and with purpose. The worlds themselves are layered too, come to think of it, such as Taris's rich overworld and destitute underworld.
It's like poetry, so if they rhyme, every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one. Hopefully it'll work.
Alongside these quests are a variety of mini-games. There's the standard RPG necessity of a card game, with this one mimicking blackjack for the most part. There fortunately aren't really any quests tied to this minigame, so don't worry too much. It acts mostly as a time sink. Next we have the swoop racing. This is bigged up to be a dangerous race by most people on Taris, but it essentially boils down to an episode 1 style pod race, but with none of the fun. Instead of adrenaline-filled turns and jumps, KOTOR's pod racing sees the player drag racing on a straight strip, dodging obstacles and hitting speed boosters to finish with the fastest time. This minigame is more about course memorization and timing for changing of the gears than it is an actual pod racing style event. The final minigame is the turret section on the Ebon Hawk. Occasionally when flying through space, you will be intercepted by enemy fighters and be required to fight them off. This is, of course, taking influence from the scene in episode 4 when Luke mounts the Falcon's gun turret. Unfortunately, however, this minigame is mostly boring. I'm sorry, yes it feels like Star Wars, but it really takes away from the core gameplay of KOTOR. This would fit well in a more action-based Star Wars game like the Battlefront games or Jedi Outcast series, but it doesn't make sense in a slower paced, more thought-provoking RPG. Overall, the minigames feel largely tacked on as a means for world building, but they do accomplish that goal very well. So while they may be lackluster from a gameplay standpoint, their inclusion is still worthwhile when you consider that this is a huge 30-hour plus experience, where spending a few minutes accomplishing an off-task goal can still have its place. The perceptions of good and bad, and how morality can easily be twisted, are hallmarks of the Star Wars universe, especially when hard choices have to be made by a main character. Just like Luke on the big screen, KOTOR sees the player embarking on their own journey of discovery and wonder, where you make the critical decisions. You dictate what happens and how it happens. Unlike some generic story-based action games, or even some huge RPGs, the player can make some dramatic changes to the game and in some cases completely alter many aspects of their playthrough, and not just with what ending they eventually receive. These choices, for the most part, fall into two categories: light side and dark side. Light side being the traditional good guy choices: help those in need, don't ask or accept rewards, avoid physical battle and death where possible, and protect those that are defenseless. Dark side is the exact opposite, instead letting the player become a power-hungry monster as they murder, steal, and otherwise become a complete badass on their intergalactic adventure. These choices, while very black and white on the surface, still offer some great replay value. Whenever you make a decision, whether light or dark, you will always be wondering what would have happened if you had picked the alternative scenario from the opposite side. The multiple random encounters that the player finds themselves in are some of the best accounts for this. Whenever you find the black bars encroaching from the top and bottom with some NPCs arguing, you know that the spotlight is about to be on you and you're never gonna know what to expect. It gives power to the player and can feel very invigorating, especially when you want to spice things up and choose that one evil option on your otherwise light side playthrough. These random encounters ensure that you stay interested and invested, making sure that you don't find yourselves growing bored doing a lot of the downtime and running around to different locations during quests. However, while all of this does sound great on the surface, there are some instances where you're given the illusion of choice, only to find that the outcome is, for the most part, guaranteed to happen regardless of what choice you make. This can be especially frustrating when you're given multiple options that all result in the same response. Thankfully, you will only notice this shortcoming on multiple playthroughs however. 2003 was a long time ago, and what counted as cutting edge then is almost ancient by today's standards. Textures, models, animations, and most of the technical graphics of KOTOR are expectedly dated. Yet much like how the original Battlefront 2 nailed the aesthetics of Star Wars, so does Knights of the Old Republic. Each location feels perfect, from the tranquil grassy fields of Dantooine accompanied by an airborne manta ray, to the underwater hidden science labs of Manan. This is undeniably Star Wars. Faces also look quite good for the time. It's still clear who's meant to be attractive, who's meant to be rugged, and who's meant to be young or old. I find the facial animations are also very underrated. While they may not be as subtle as real life, they do an excellent job of portraying a character's emotions, especially when you combine that with the voice acting. Sonically, KOTOR has aged like a fine wine, with music by the Jeremy Soule, just 1 year after his masterpiece with Morrowind, and he continues to impress with the soundtrack here. Powerful combat music raises heart rates and perfectly complements the on-screen action, while gentle melodies meld majestically against the serene planetary exploration. Most importantly, the music perfectly meshes with John Williams' iconic score. Each of Soule's contributions feel like they belong in Star Wars. Not one track stands out as subpar in comparison to the famous songs associated with the films. Sound effects too mix perfectly with that Star Wars theme. Creatures sound as exotic as one expects, as does the excellently made alien dialogue mentioned earlier. Be warned though, on the PC version of this game, some sound effects can play far too loud, especially the animal noises on Kashyyyk that play endlessly during conversations.
Who are you, another civil merchant like that Kotor slime up on the docking ring? This is my territory.
KOTOR is unique in that it almost guarantees you will want to play the game at least twice to see how the story unravels, effectively doubling the average playtime. Your first run should be done completely blind, playing how you want to, with the second playthrough aimed at making the opposite decisions with a different playstyle and seeing all the foreshadowing scattered throughout the story. The game has immense replay value because of this. You can have 4 separate playthroughs that all have a different experience between the 2 available genders and the opposite sides of the morality system. I won't spoil the story, but here's what I will say. The plot, at least at first, seems very standard, not taking too many risks from what has already been established within the Star Wars franchise. There's the big scary superweapon, the gravely wounded mechanical bad guy, good guys with blue laser swords and bad guys with red. These parallels with the movie help to draw in the player. They make you feel comfortable, like you know where the story is going. This is what makes that key moment 60% into the game so rewarding, so mind-blowing, and so historic. Bioware successfully subverted fans' expectations to great praise over a decade before Disney's failed attempts. The plot may be standard, but it's how you experience said plot that makes it so worthwhile. How the player slowly unravels different mysteries, learns the history of recent events, discovers all the lore and mythos, and finally reveals the truth. It works so well because you aren't just watching the playable character do all these things, you are doing it yourself. You're making all the same connections in your brain as both you and the protagonist slowly reveal and learn the truth. In a masterful move, Bioware allow you to explore the story at your own pace, and in any order you please. After you complete a necessary step of the protagonist's journey on Dantooine, the galaxy opens up to you, giving you the freedom to travel to any planet you want, solving the local problems and quests while you discover more about the story at large. This is what makes most Western RPGs so replayable, the ability to play the game in the order of your choosing. While the start and the end remain similar, it's the journey that really changes how you experience this masterpiece. KOTOR's importance to Bioware cannot be understated. The systems they put in place with KOTOR clearly influenced how they made games going forward. Just look at the obvious similarities in Dragon Age and Mass Effect, the excellent world design, exotic and dynamic companions, multiple game-changing dialogue choices, and the morality system. It is instantly apparent that they have continued to try and capture and build upon the magic they released with KOTOR. This game's success can be in no way understated when it comes to the success of Bioware as a developer in the decade that followed KOTOR's release. Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic is an experience as deep as it is long. With a potential 50 plus hours of gameplay across multiple playthroughs, the game offers some of the biggest bang for your buck available today. While the game has aged on the technical side, its world building, immersion, writing, story, and RPG replayability make the overall experience timeless. KOTOR has stood the test of time and remains a worthwhile game for Star Wars and Western RPG fans alike. It is as good as you remember, and if you haven't already seen it, there is a brand new rumour going around that a new KOTOR may be in development. If that turns out to be true, it could be massive. I hope you enjoyed this in-depth analysis of one of the greatest games of all time. If you did, then please subscribe for more, like this video and comment below what you thought. I'll be discussing what changes we would like to see in this new potential KOTOR game in next week's Jwlar Plays, where I'll be checking out Star Wars The Old Republic, so stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching.